This is your host for the Questions of Fire podcast. Today, we're going to go in quite a bit different direction, taking on a domain so important in our lives that we often underestimate it. We work with big companies. We live using big companies. No matter what life you live, you either work back, you work with government, whatever. And what allows these huge companies to work is the systems that they have and the processes they have. These projects, complex ensembles, thing that we know. And I'm bringing to somebody who has been working in this industry. He probably might not even like me saying for how long, but over 3 decades now at this stage. Let me first of all introduce you to Daljit. Daljit, welcome to the show. Thank you very much, sir.
Hi, thank you for having me. Thank you.
Brilliant. We're both fortunate. We've been involved in huge organizations. They're set up, particularly changes to make because a lot of things happen for a variety of reasons. And, even if we start with you as an enterprise system, for people who are not, we're going to have a little bit of both here. Could you explain what is an enterprise systems architect? Just start with that one,
A question that's asked many a time. Okay, so enterprise architecture is really, I'm going to differentiate between enterprise systems architecture and enterprise architecture. Yeah, enterprise architecture is really about an organization. It's what is an enterprise? It could be a government organization, it could be a not-for-profit, but enterprise architecture is really focusing on, building the operational side, it's quite a wide topic. Enterprise systems architecture, on the other hand, is really about alignment, collaboration. It's about taking your business operating model and aligning your technology landscape to that operating model. Yeah, and it's an interesting question because enterprise architecture takes into account things like the people, the softer side of things. Enterprise systems architecture is really just about the system side of things. How do we create systems that can deliver the business outcomes that we expect, factoring in everything else? And when we talk about the stack, and I think that'll give you a better picture of it. I hope that made sense. Right, so we're on the stack. Sorry, I can't hear you.
We have this stack, Daljit. I just want to say, it's fantastic that you produce something like this because, I've worked in so many different big organizations and they all have a mix between their own version. Several architects even have their own version even within the same organization. And then they also have references like CMMI, maturity models, etc., etc. So probably before we get into your stack, is there a sort of global standard for this type of solution? Or is this an evolving nature that's happening because enterprise systems are evolving?
Right, so one of the things I would say is when we look at disciplines like enterprise architecture and enterprise systems architecture, you look at some of the individuals that are producing what we call the artifacts, the products, and depending on their background, there's a lot of bias in what they produce. There are other frameworks out there, and if you read the book, I talk about the various frameworks. There's something called TOGAF, which is one of the popular ones. There's also something called MODAF, which is more of a military type architectural framework. There are several frameworks out there. What I tried to do with and I'll call it a conceptual canvas, because I tried to bring in some of the project experience I've had in the past, together with some of the academic stuff that was out there. So, for example, if we take the canvas, and what we're trying to do is we're trying to say, we've got our enterprise systems architecture lens on, where we're focusing purely on, mapping some of the systems to, some of the business outcomes we want to go. So if we do look at this stack, and what I'm saying is at the very top layer of this stack is something called the business operating model, and what that is every business has an operating model. The shopkeeper down the road, with his small store, he has an operating model. How does he conduct his business? Now, also in that operating model, you're pulling things into the organization, you're doing stuff with it, and you're selling, you're providing some kind of value, and delivering some kind of outcomes. And the operating model, and if you take the work of guys like Michael E. Porter, and we look at some of the other stuff, these are all of the things that we have to consider. So, we look at some of the external forces. Every organization, be it large, medium, or small, has external forces. It can be the government regulations, it could be market forces, it could be competitors. So one of the things you have to factor in mind is the external forces that are affecting your organization. Yeah, those external forces may lead to drivers for some kind of change. And the drivers for change could be, you have a new chief that has a new strategy where he wants to take the business. That's a driver for change. And then you look at some of the state disruptors. You look at all these kind of things. COVID is a great example. A year ago, an organization would not have probably focused all of its efforts on some of its channels, like the web front ends for a lot of their systems. They had shops. Now they had to change their business operating model. Yeah.
Absolutely.
And then we look at things like the structures. Organizations evolve over time, and as they evolve, they kind of have these structures that they kind of work to. They're not as, all right, a lot of new companies come along and they're dynamic and they can change and they are agile, but a lot of big corporations, like the Titanic, very difficult to turn, right? And then we look at various business. Yeah, you look at the business to business type models, the consumer to business. And what you're trying to do here at the very top layer of the stack is understand how your business operates. What are the forces that make your business, move forward? What are the things that, the whole financial management side of things is just one element, and
So
also
if here, the key thing, and that bring in change how the business operates. This is a big question for people who are familiar. Does it change at small and according to the size of the business and how it's progressing?
Sorry, you cut out on a lot of that. I didn't quite catch most of that.
The changes are business expands and business contracts, and then we have things like laws or changes in competition. But how does a system architecture change as it expands? If you have a big 50,000 person company and then it's because of growth over the next 5 years to 55,000, is this architecture capable of with expansion? How does it cope with change in size of an organization?
Right. So basically, what I'm trying to present here is a mindset, a certain way of thinking. Okay, and what I'm trying to also promote within that way of thinking are some of the components you need to factor in. So, as I said, irrelevant of the size of the organization, if you're providing IT services, okay, if you're providing any kind of system services, the first thing you're going to do is understand your business. Forget the IT side of things, understand the environment it operates in. And by understanding that environment, if you know there's something going to come left field, for example, if we take the insurance industry, okay, if we take the insurance industry, a couple of years ago, there was a new regulatory thing that came out, which was called IFRS 17. And what that meant was that most insurance companies, to show the way they report, they their chart of accounts and the whole reporting would have to change. Yeah. But the downstream effect of that was the structure of reporting. You know, you had to now, the way your profits were declared was totally different to how it was previously. Now, that change was coming, right? And a lot of the insurance companies had to develop new systems to meet that change. So, if you were working in the insurance industry and you saw this new regulation coming along, you would know that in the next few years, your downstream systems will be impacted. And so just by understanding your business operating model, just by understanding the environment your organization operates in and some of the regulatory external forces, you know that there's drivers for change that are going to happen. You can then start planning and provisioning for these type of things. Yeah. So,
Yeah.
and as we go, and the whole point of the stack, and we're going to go through this a bit more, is by understanding the top layer, you then move down to the next layer. And the next layer is really about, okay, so we know that we've got this new regulation coming in. And we know that we have to, you know, GDPR is a great example. 10 years ago, you know, we weren't. Yeah, so that's a really good example, GDPR. Now, we know that that is coming in, or it's in. So what are the business processes that we have to support that top layer? And, you know, by understanding your existing business processes, you can then introduce various forms of change. So if we look at our existing processes, we say, right, okay, are our processes manual? Are they automated? Are they formal, informal? You know, how do we execute our business processes? And then how do we actually represent our business processes? By understanding how you're actually doing your business processes allows you to then start thinking, okay, well, what do we need to change in order to meet the new regulation that's coming, or a new entrant into our market, you know? So what we're now doing is building up a little picture. So we now understand our business, we understand the external forces, we understand the competitive pressures, we understand the the disruptors. Now we're then saying, right, okay, well, how are we currently supporting our business, right? What business processes are now going to change because of some of these disruptors or these external forces, okay? And then what we then do is then we move down another layer down, okay? And we then start thinking, okay, well, we now know that we are going to need a new process. We now know that we have to modify our process. Then we start looking at the capabilities and services that deliver those business processes, okay? And by that, you know, capabilities and services, they could be technical, they could be business, they could be all kinds of things. But basically, it's the gap between the applications and the actual business processes. It's clustering everything together.
Just one question, Daljit, is, you know, having worked in a lot of big organizations, is those processes are not mapped through the organization and systems. When you come in change project, sometimes you have to read something that may not have been 5 years, for example. So part of resetting the landscape when you're doing it. And I guess you have here is a good model for that reassessment.
Think of this as a bit of a tick box exercise, okay? And you know what we're trying to do here is not promote any specific methodology or any specific. I'm not saying this is a framework. What I'm saying is this is you as an enterprise architect or you as an architect will go into an organization, okay? You need to then start thinking about the systems that organization is using and the new systems that it may need. This allows you to kind of conceptually put everything together. Okay? Basically, what you're doing is you're aligning your technology landscape, which is the bottom layers, to your business operating model. And this is what this is trying to do. So think of it as a bit of a tick in the box exercise where, you've got to make sure that you've covered off these kind of things. So, for example, if you're looking at, you just walked into a new organization, and the first thing you might do is you might do a simple SWOT analysis. What are the strengths, weaknesses, opportunities to this organization? Tick in the box. You might then think, right, okay, let's look at the political, economic, social, and technical side of things. The PEST, tick in the box. And then you start doing all the Porter's five forces and structure, conduct, performance. These are standard business tools that everyone's, these are well documented, and I'm not reinventing the wheel. I'm just saying this is something that you have to consider. Now, once you've ticked all of those boxes, you then got a good understanding of how your organization is functioning today, but also how it may function in the next few years as well, because of all the external drivers and all of that kind of stuff. Okay. Once you've done that, then you start moving into the next tick in the box. You say, right, okay, do I understand my business processes? Order to cash, for example, is a business process. How do I take my order, and then how do I turn that into, the cash that comes in? Do I understand the existing processes? Then you start saying, okay, in order to deliver those business processes, what are the services that I need? For example, do I need communications, which you probably do? That's a service in itself. So what service, you kind of build this kind of catalog of services up. And most organizations, large organizations, have a catalog of capabilities and services that map back to their business. These kind of exist, and enterprise architecture teams build this over time. Okay. The next layer down is the most important. Well, it's not the most important, but the next thing is really understanding your execution. So I call it execution, right? But really, it's your application services that are running to support the capabilities, which then support the business processes, which then support the business operating model. Okay. And these, what basically what I say is these are, they can be COTS. You could have Oracle Financials, for example, is a COTS package, that Oracle provide, and it handles all of your financial systems. There's a lot more to it, HR and everything. But you may have commercial off-the-shelf packages that you have. You then may have some bespoke developed systems that support bespoke processes, and then you've got to also think about, well, how do I deliver these? Am I outsourcing this? Am I doing it in-house? Am I looking at the new models, application as a service? These are all the kind of things that you would have to think about. A good architecture team would have standards that it has adopted and all of these kind of things. So my third layer within my stack is really, those execution services, the application layer.
Now, well, this is where the rubber hits the road, Daljit. This is,
this is it.
We could say,
Yeah. But what you're doing, what you're then doing is really building this kind of portfolio of knowledge, where you're now starting to get into the IT side of things, and then you've got to join it to the business-centric views, if that makes sense. And then as we get into the data and information, I mean, you've got the data journey, who are the custodians of the data? You've got the big data side of things, loads of things there, that you have to think about. So, for instance, we talked about the business operating model, and we mentioned GDPR, You start, as you start going down, you start saying, okay, well, how do I, if someone's written to me and they want to be deleted, how do I remove their data records? So you start thinking, okay, well, what capabilities do I need for that? What execution applications will I need? And then you start thinking, right, okay, well, how long do I need to retain my data for? I'm doing a piece of work with a bank at the moment, and some of the information I was told, could last up to 100 years. But we won't go into what information, but they might need to keep some information for 100 years. That's quite a lot of data, and you've got to plan for that. And then, although you've got all of this data, you then start thinking about the integrity of the data. How do you quality assure what you've got is actually fit for purpose, that it delivers the value you want? So basically, you're now moving down the stack, right? And now you're moving closer to the tin and string, as I will call it. Yeah. Okay. And then the next thing, obviously, is this is more of the technology services, and this is the stuff like transportation. How do you send your information from here to here? The messaging. Are you doing real-time messaging? For example, a customer needs an alert. Do you send that real time? Do you batch it? These are all the kind of things that you need to kind of consider at the next layer down. And then we get into the real nuts and bolts. We get into the end user computing and the hosting and the servers, the firewalls, the routers. So all of a sudden, we've gone from understanding our business, understanding, this new regulation that's coming in, right? All banks, for example, they do know your customer. They've got to know their customer for various reasons. We've gone from understanding our business operating model and some of the things that we have to consider, all the way down to the data that we might have to keep or ingest from third parties, down to where do we store it? Do we host it in the cloud? And then how do we communicate between that cloud and our on-premise services? So you're now starting to go from top to bottom. And what enterprise systems architecture is about that, aligning your technology estate to your business operating model. Yeah. And then the next thing is a wrapper around everything. It's what I call the hygiene services, the disaster recovery, the security, and some of the non-functional stuff like performance, scalability, all of that kind of stuff. So if we step back, right, and your first question to me was, what was enterprise architecture and what was enterprise systems architecture? I don't think I gave you a great answer, but now I'm going to come back to that and give you what I think is a good answer, right? Okay. So if we step back, we will now say, right, okay, if we look at enterprise systems architecture, it's very much systems focused. Yeah. It's very much about understanding your business and then making sure that the technology you got within your ecosystem or your landscape aligns to your business and what you're trying to deliver, not just for today, but also for tomorrow. Yeah. That's what enterprise systems architecture is about. And I tried to depict it as simple as I could on one picture. Okay. There's a lot more to this, and I have extended this out. I've modified it for various industries, but that's what enterprise architecture is really about the top 2-3 layers. It's about architecting your enterprise to deliver the business outcomes you want. And it's taken into account the people, it's taken into account all the softer side of things that you normally wouldn't consider within the IT side of things, like team structures. How do you commission a team to deliver certain outcomes? These are the tools that will support it, and we consider that. So enterprise architecture is more about the operational and the non-technical side of things. Now, I would argue that enterprise systems architecture is a subcomponent of enterprise architecture. Now, stepping back, does that make sense?
Absolutely. It leads to the next question, Daljit, which is something you mentioned as well, is the EA or the enterprise architect mindset. Because what you've done is given a sort of good idea of enterprise and which support that. But show us the stack, and you do also mention the EA mindset. Is it you, or is it something more?
Well, the reason I talk about the mindset is because if you're a bit of an old fogey like me, who's been doing this for like 4 decades now, you kind of have touched on most of these things. Okay, but you know, you can't do everything. The bottom line is there's a lot. I'll give you an example. If we were to take one layer, let's just take, I don't know, let's take layer 6, which is hosting. I'm going to take hosting, right?
Okay.
Now, where you store stuff, right? So if we were to look at, and if you look at the stack, I'll talk about the cloud. Now, when you're talking about hosting information in the cloud, it's not as simple as let's just put all of our information on a third hosting. To cloud-based hosting is really third-party hosting of your servers and everything. Yeah, forget all the titles, but it is basically having data center services provided by a third party. Okay, now if we were to take that one little area, I mean that is a massive area because you're now talking about configuring servers and virtual machines and all of that kind of stuff on a third-party hosted service. And the amount of knowledge that is required, not only from the technical side, but did you know, for example, I'll give you an example. If you want to host data for, say, a country like Turkey, you know, it can't be done because you are not allowed to take that information out of the country. And a lot of these cloud-based servers, for instance, Amazon Web Services and Azure, they're they're all over the globe. And you have to prove to the regulators in each country that you're not to moving their data from location A to location B. So little things like this, what I'm trying to highlight is that cloud-based hosting is not just, it's not something that everyone would know everything about. It just isn't. For example, if you go to a country like Poland, their I think they're called the KNF. They've got specific rules about hosting Polish data in cloud-based services. Yeah. And these are the kind of things that, and it's not easy unless you study it. It's not easy to know. So when I talk about the mindset, it's really about understanding how everything fits together and the kind of things that you need to factor in when you're thinking about delivering services for your company.
Daljit, how is that now shifting? Because we look in the last, particularly last 5 to 10 years, between the additional reporting that many particular financial institutions have, the focus on data, your layer on data. There's new organizations, we have CDOs, we have, data, whether that's in the cloud or on-prem or whatever else it is. There has become a shift in the mindset to an organization is effectively its data. Now, it needs the systems in order to manage that, but that shift on the importance of data and its reportability, has that had an impact? How DPR as an example, how do we incorporate major shifts like that into your mind?
Okay, I think when we look at the stack, I think I've covered most things. And when we talk about, the golden nuggets, the new oil of today, data, when we start talking about things like that, you still have to factor everything else in. Data and information is only good if you can act on it, or there can be value derived from it. The last thing you want to do is just keep masses of data for the sake of it. If you can model it and you can actually get some information of value out of it, then great. But you still got to host that data somewhere. You still got to connect to that data. Then you've got to create the applications that allow you to report on that data. So trends come and go. And if you look at the past 30, 40 years, we've had loads of trends, in each one of these layers. At the moment, we talk about, cloud-based. A lot of organizations, if you look at their strategies, they're all talking about moving to the cloud. But if you look at the maturity of those strategies and the execution of those, they're not as far ahead as you think they would. when people put buzzwords around, I'm moving this to the cloud, I'd rather then step back and say, well, hold on, I'm moving this to a third-party data center that is provisioned for me by someone else, and I don't have to have all the overhead that goes with it. We'll always get buzzwords. We always will do. And you've been along.
I was going to give you an example of another one, and I've seen this one go many iterations, Daljit. It's almost funny now. There was a period, I would say even 20 years ago, and offshoring, shipping to India, Poland, whatever. And then I was 10 years ago, and organization to organization, in-house a lot of services that they tried to put up right. And again, and there's these market trends to particular areas, like they are, it seems to be trends that.
Well,
and I think, go ahead.
Okay, the problem I have with I'd like to see a return on that investment. I'd like to see. I did a piece of work. I can't mention the client's name, but they had outsourced a bulk of their IT to a third party in India. But when they did the first contract, they were sold all the bells and whistles. The contract wasn't going through as it should have done. So the client asked me to get on a plane and sit with their outsourcing partner in country for a couple of weeks. And I did that. I got on the plane and I sat with and I was looking at what the guys were doing on a day-to-day basis, and my recommendation was to bring it back on shore. I won't go into the full details, but there are some cases where offshoring works, okay? And the trend, and this annoys me with a lot of organizations, they do follow the trend and what the large consultancies told them, Look, what COVID's shown us is you do, by all means, look at the trends, but always measure the value and the return on that investment. Moving your development offshore, great. If it can be done, brilliant. But think about, the true cost of taking that service to a different destination where you lose full control. And you pay for, look, let's be honest, you pay for what you get, right? Okay. That's just a fact of life. If you're going to play, if you're going to get a resource at a third of, say, UK rates, expect, not you're not going to get what it just doesn't work. And I've seen that so many times. And to be honest, I'm working with a client at the moment and I'm witnessing it. You really do pay for what you get. So when it comes to trends, cloud-based, offshoring, all of these things, they come and go. But at the heart of it, a good architect needs to understand the full stack. Okay? These are things, it doesn't matter where your development is done. And in the stack, I actually there is a layer. If we look at the, I'm just having a quick browse of it now. I should know this by heart if I'm totally honest. But if we look at the application layer, we do talk about the delivery mechanism, whether it should be outsourced, in-house, or application as a service. These are all the kind of things that a good architect needs to think about, okay? And what this conceptual canvas does is help the mindset. It is there as a, as a tool for the enterprise architect to say, right, okay, have I thought about this? Have I thought about this? So, and also maybe, sorry.
Yeah, no, I just had a thought then. If we're kind of going deeper, Daljit. So when you work on an individual program or project, quite often you have a solution. How does the solution in with the enterprise architect according to maybe your outlook?
Okay, that's a good question. Look, there are various type of architects. Okay, and I wrote a blog, and if you want to, if anyone listening to this, they can go and read the blog about the different types of architects. So let's put them into three broad categories: enterprise, solution, and technical. Within each category, you've got different types of architects. So, for instance, at the enterprise level, you may have an enterprise architect that just specializes in the application side of things. Because these are big, organizations don't have one or two applications, they have thousands of applications. Okay. Now, the enterprise architect, his role in life is to understand the macro picture. Okay. A solution or a project architect is a different beast because they're more at the execution layer. They're more at the delivery. There is a specific problem which has been defined in a project outline document and a business case. There is a specific problem that they are addressing. And what they try and do, whereas the enterprise architect would look at the external forces and all the drivers for change and all of that kind of stuff, and then map it all down and try and, I talk about something called control, inform, and direct. And that is what enterprise architects do. They control the ecosystem, they inform the projects and their stakeholders on some of the strategic directions and all the other stuff. And they also direct through the governance mechanisms the project. A solution architect is really, if you take a vertical, they are focusing on one specific outcome. Not one outcome, that's wrong. But they are working on a specific business problem that their project is set to deliver. So, an example, a solution architect may be working on a HR system that is, I'm just thinking of an idea. Okay, so imagine a problem is, they've got a factory somewhere and they're using time cards and they are doing everything on premise and they want to move to the cloud because that is the corporate strategy. Okay, a solution architect will come in and think, right, okay, how do I get rid of those boxes and connect those time machines direct to the cloud? So it's a specific problem. It's a specific set of outcomes that they're working on. The enterprise architect would think, right, okay, which cloud-based services are we going to use? What are the regulatory conditions that allow me to put data in that cloud? And can I move that data from one jurisdiction to another jurisdiction? So enterprise is very much about the big picture. The solution architect is very much about a specific problem and a specific set of outcomes, if that helps. And also they work with the delivery vehicles, the developers, the business analysts, the systems analysts to deliver that outcome. So
Brilliant. No, I think that's perfect. So what I've been watching a lot of your content now, as well as you've on enterprise systems architect, where people can go and get it. What's a lot of people, or not a lot of people actually, it's quite a select few of people do a job at the level that you do it. But what drove you to share your ideas, the concepts, the models that you've built in your own mind from your experience, rather than just do your day job, Daljit?
Yeah, I mean, first of all, we are the sum of our experiences, and I've been quite fortunate when I first started freelancing 23 years ago. I managed to work in several different countries. So I worked Switzerland, Sweden, Finland, Hong Kong, been to quite a few countries in the early days, and you see how different people work on different nationalities, and you build up all of this experience. Yeah, okay. What I find is that when, as a consultant, you need to land on site and deliver value immediately. Yeah, because people are paying for your time. They don't want, and I've been in situations where, you land and you've got a team of 20 or 30 people, and the last thing you want them to do is constantly question your knowledge base. And in the IT game, unfortunately, that is the way things work. So what I tend to do is I produce content, and that content is normally validated by quite a few people. And when I put the content out in the form of a blog. I've written loads of magazine articles, and I've published a book as well. The whole point of that is, if Jonathan is going to work with me tomorrow, right? Okay, you've been on site for a month or 2 months. You want to know what I bring to the party, rather than sitting there in a meeting room, wasting a lot of time, trying to suss out what you know, what you don't know. People just go and look at your blog, they look at your material, and they kind of get a feel for you. And also, I'll be honest, it's helped me get work in the past. I got one contract where I disagreed with the guy. We had quite an intense conversation about Agile, and we disagreed. Next day, he phoned me up because he had read my blog, and he said, well, what you said was not what you wrote in the blog, and I had to correct him. And I said, no, what I said was X, Y, and Z. And he offered me the job. He said, can you start on Monday? I said, okay, great. So by producing content, it serves two masters. The first master is potential clients. They can see the value you're going to bring to them. Okay, we've all come across people that have got fancy CVs and they've done all this stuff. But by producing content, they could do their due diligence on you. Okay. And that acts as a bit of a marketing tool. But the second thing is, when you're working with large teams, you don't have the luxury of you don't have the luxury of sitting there and trying to pass your credentials over. Yes, I've done this before. Yes, no, go and read my blog, mate. I haven't got time for this. Just, and you're delivering value faster than someone else. And, it's worked. And plus I enjoy doing it, if I'm totally honest.
Oh, no, it's fantastic. What you remind me of is, and I only meet a few of them though, is some, would say, more senior developers in the game, a similar to time to us, and they bring along their own PSQL libraries, their own Java libraries, but 20, 30 years. So when something has to be optimized, they've probably done it 5 times before, and it just makes them so much more efficient. Now you're exposing your library in a way to clients and potential clients on the front side. That also to speed up the communication, even if you do engage what you're doing. So I think even just that idea of not having simply a CV, but creating your model of experience as you go is a very valuable.
Yeah, I think more people should. I do encourage people to produce content. There's a lot of good information that just goes to waste. So yeah, I'll keep doing it. However, on the negative side of it, you produce content based on your experience. And this is real world experience. So I was asked 2 weeks ago to do some advisory for a Canadian insurance company. And, it was a 1 hour advisory. They asked me all kinds of questions, and it was great. It was, but then what I then went back and I thought, right, I'm going to write that into a blog, because some of the answers I gave were quite interesting.
Excellent.
Now, what I do find is that, okay, I'll take that material, but someone might disagree with it, and sometimes you can have polite disagreements, and different people have different views. For example, we talked about the stack earlier on. Someone might say, well, hold on, you forgot financial crime, sanctions list, where's the external forces where you must, if you're a large organization, you're doing business with a company, why aren't you checking for sanctions, against the UN sanctions list, all this kind of stuff. So people do have their own opinions, and some people get rather emotional. I tend not to argue with people. I think there's no value in it.
My thought on that, if someone is arguing with you, they're already giving you the authority, and they're against you and have the authority. Like I'm a PM and a program manager. Extremely quiet. I actually where they were giving feedback, even if it was arguing, we need to do this way, or the technical mindset. That more and ability of disruptive things. Now, as a younger person, you have to be able to almost do the performance of alchemy and take that with negative feedback and turn it into a constructive conversation, either to close it down or create a new alternative that might be even better. And with experience, you can't do that, you know?
You've got to be really careful. I'll give you another example. I wrote this blog, which was kind of neutral, but I felt I needed to get some more content out there. This was just as COVID kicked in. And I wrote one statement within that, which, based on my experience, I felt it was, I ended up getting into a long conversation with an individual, which ended up in him sending me his CV, him sending me some other stuff. And I just said, listen, we were talking about X, now we're moving on to Y. Can we not do that? This is, there's no value in it for me or for you. So you've got to be careful about what material you put out there, because I just, there are some people out there that just, are weird, and you've got to accept that. And if you look at some of my blogs, when I do post stuff, I turn comments off. I just think it's my opinion, right? And based on my experience, you may have a different opinion. Let's not get into a long conversation about it. Just beg to differ and move on. You've got to be really careful about what content you put out there.
So a question I'd like to ask. We're in similar boats. You've a lot of experience. I actually have a son who just finished college now, going into his first job as a software engineer. And I'm thinking of the young Daljit. If you go around and talk to the 18-year-old Daljit and give him some advice now, coming from we say, the ups and downs, the walls, the ceilings you've hit. What piece of advice would you give to a younger person? And a lot of people are going into the technical industry because it's one of the industries that's thriving at the moment. What advice would you give?
The problem we've got at the moment, and I can't see it changing much, is the whole offshoring model. Now, we've got people coming out of university with first degrees in software engineering. They're going to struggle to get their first job, because a lot of these large companies, not the small companies, but a lot of these large companies are, they see this model as being cheaper. They're getting more, and this is why I started work with BCS. I wanted to kind of start promoting the material and started helping the young. And we did a lot of sessions at universities, because I thought, why not go into universities and teach them about EA?
Excellent.
My message is, look, over the past 30 years, we've seen trends come and go. Okay. If you're going to do any further studies, don't make it too product specific. Make it more. I'll give you an example. So 20 years ago, maybe 30 years ago, depending when, if you had done the the Novell CNE exam, if you had done the Novell CNE exam, you would have earned a fortune. You would easily have clocked up, £500, £600, £700 a day, easily, being a Novell certified engineer. Okay. If at the same time, instead of spending a year doing your Novell CNE, you had done, I don't know, an additional degree, a master's degree, whatever, right? 20 years down the line, that degree is still of value. That Novell CNE exam, to be honest, half the young people wouldn't even know what Novell CNE is, right? So my advice to a lot of young people is to invest wisely in yourself, right? Trends come and go, and think about the long game.
Yeah.
Also, master your craft. I think, if you're working in IT, you need to at least understand one programming language, okay? And you need to understand it well, and constantly invest in yourself. It's not, we don't leave university and we start thinking, right, okay, I've got my degree, I've got a job for life. You know, you've got to constantly keep learning, and if you enjoy it, that's even better. You know,
Brilliant.
that's all I really advise. I think it's a difficult one for the young today. You know, my children unfortunately aren't going into IT, but yeah, I think it's very difficult, especially when it's so easy. So I've just hired a young lady to work for me, and she's based in India. And if you look at the young lady's CV, really impressive, you know. And the salary I'm paying her is not a great deal compared to UK standards, you know. So yeah,
So,
I think it's a very competitive, and we've got to think global. Yeah, whenever
sure,
you go in, you know, if you're working in IT now, think global. You're never going to work with
absolutely.
friend blogs in the same city. You're always going to be working with, you know, people. And also, my advice to any young person is if you can go and do a stint abroad, do it. You know, that it's amazing. You know, that you've worked abroad and you know the value it brings to you. You know.
Oh, absolutely. You get involved in things that you just wouldn't have at home. So
Yeah.
it gives you the capability to expand much faster, Daljit, without a doubt, you know.
Yeah.
Well,
Yeah.
I'd love to say thank you very, very much for your time, Daljit, and your insights. I really like sort of the stick and the approach and the understanding of how we say the different roles play a part within each other. Because anyone who works in big organizations touches on this subject. Even the labels be slightly different, but the idea is the same. And so, what I'd like to do is say to anybody who is in this area in terms of enterprise architecture, going into it or looking for support. Daljit has a wealth of experience. This was just a snippet, icing on top of the cake we'll put with the stack. And I'd like to thank you very much for your time and look forward to talking to you again down the line, Daljit.
Oh, likewise, likewise. Thank you very much for having me.
Brilliant. And have a
Brilliant.
wonderful evening then. Take care.
You too. Bye.